Olumide was a successful and wealthy businessman who lived in a large, luxurious estate. Despite all his riches, his greatest treasure was his daughter, Safina. She was everything a father could dream of, intelligent, kind, and full of dreams for the future. Safina's mother had passed away when she was young, leaving a gap in their lives that was hard to fill. However, Olumide did his best to give Safina all the love and care he could. Life took a sudden turn when Olumide decided to remarry. He met a charming woman named Chidinma, who seemed to be the perfect partner at first. She was beautiful, well-spoken, and made Olumide believe she could bring happiness back into their home. What Olumide didn't know was that behind her sweet smile, Chidinma had a heart full of greed. She had her eyes set on his wealth and estate, and she was willing to do anything to get what she wanted. Safina, although cautious at first, tried her best to accept her father's new wife. She hoped Chidinma would become a friend and perhaps bring peace to their home. Little did Safina know that this woman would soon turn her world upside down. As time went on, Chidinma's true intentions would slowly start to unravel. Safina's peaceful life was about to be thrown into chaos, and neither she nor Olumide could foresee the storm that was coming. This was just the beginning of a tale filled with betrayal, resilience, and unexpected twists. Olumide's love for his daughter, Safina, was deeper than anything else in his life. Ever since Safina was a little girl, he had been her protector and guide, always making sure she had the best of everything. Their relationship was more than just that of a father and daughter. It was a partnership built on trust, admiration, and unconditional love. Olumide admired Safina not just for her beauty, but for her brilliant mind. She was quick to learn, curious about the world, and had a heart full of compassion. Her desire to help others and make a difference in the world always made her father proud. Safina, in return, loved her father deeply. She knew that he had worked hard to build everything they had, and she had always respected his dedication and vision. As she grew older, Safina developed an interest in her father's business. She loved sitting in on meetings, listening to his discussions with partners, and learning everything she could about running the company. Olumide noticed her enthusiasm and sharp intellect. He began to share more of his business knowledge with her, confident that one day she could take over the estate and the empire he had spent his life building. For Olumide, there was no doubt in his mind that Safina would be the one to continue his legacy. He often told her, "When I'm no longer here, everything will be yours, Safina. You're the one who understands what it takes to make this family proud." These words meant the world to Safina. They gave her a sense of purpose and a deep drive to work even harder. She began to dream of running the business one day, leading with both intelligence and kindness, just like her father. Safina wasn't just motivated by the wealth and success her father had created. She was driven by a deeper, more personal desire to make a difference. She wanted to help people, to support the community that had supported them throughout the years, and to ensure that her father's hard work would continue to benefit others even after he was gone. Though she had many dreams, Safina's ultimate goal was to honor her father's trust and love. She worked tirelessly, preparing herself for the day when she would take on the role of managing the business. And Olumide, seeing her determination and wisdom, couldn't have been prouder. His heart swelled with pride, knowing that his daughter would continue to carry his legacy forward. But in the midst of their shared dreams, there were dark clouds gathering on the horizon. Clouds that neither Olumide nor Safina could have predicted. And it wouldn't be long before Safina would learn that not everyone around her shared the same vision for her future. The trusting bond between father and daughter was about to face its greatest test. One fateful day, Olumide suddenly became very sick. It was nothing like the usual cold or fever he had experienced before. At first, he tried to push through it, hoping it would pass, but his condition grew worse with each passing day. Safina, who had always seen her father as strong and invincible, was terrified. She watched helplessly as the man who had always been there for her, guiding her, loving her, supporting her, grew weaker and weaker. The doctors could not explain what was happening, and despite their best efforts, Olumide's health continued to decline. Safina spent every moment by his side, holding his hand, trying to comfort him. But the pain of seeing him suffer was unbearable. She prayed every day, hoping for a miracle, but deep down, she feared the worst. On a quiet afternoon, with the sound of the wind gently blowing through the trees outside, Olumide passed away. It was as though the life had been taken from the house in that very moment. Safina was left standing by his bedside, frozen in shock. Her father, the man who had been her whole world, was gone. The emptiness that filled her heart was overwhelming. She cried until there were no tears left to shed, her heart breaking as she realized she would never again feel his comforting embrace or hear his voice telling her everything would be okay. The loss was more than just the death of a father. It was the loss of a future she had dreamed of, a future where she would one day take over the family business and make her father proud. Now, with Olumide gone, everything seemed uncertain. Her whole world felt like it was falling apart. But what made the situation even more complicated was Chidinma. Olumide's new wife, who had seemed so kind and loving, now seemed like a stranger to Safina. She wasn't sure where Chidinma's heart truly lay, but the sudden coldness in her stepmother's actions left Safina feeling more alone than ever. The house that once echoed with laughter and love now felt eerily silent. Safina couldn't escape the deep sadness that weighed on her chest. She tried to stay strong, knowing her father would have wanted that, but the grief was consuming. Every room in the house reminded her of him, and the thought of facing the future without him seemed impossible. As the days passed, the reality of her father's death began to sink in. Safina was devastated, unsure of how she could move forward, but little did she know, this was only the beginning of a much darker and more difficult journey. The loss of her father would soon be overshadowed by a shocking twist, one that would test her strength and resolve in ways she never imagined. After Olumide's death, things began to change in the house in ways that Safina never imagined. Chidinma, who had seemed sweet and caring when Olumide was alive, quickly took control of the estate. At first, Safina thought it was just a temporary shift. After all, Chidinma was now the wife of the man who had been the head of the household. But as the days passed, it became clear that Chidinma wasn't interested in just taking care of things. She wanted power. Safina watched in shock as her stepmother began making decisions without even asking her opinion. Chidinma started organizing parties, buying new things for herself, and taking charge of everything. She quickly made herself the center of attention, treating the estate like it was hers. Safina, once the beloved daughter of the house, was now treated like an outsider in her own home. Chidinma's behavior became more cruel with each passing day. She gave Safina no say in anything that happened around the estate. Safina found herself doing all the household chores, cleaning, cooking, and running errands, while Chidinma lived in luxury, enjoying the wealth Olumide had left behind. It felt like Safina was a servant in the house that had once been her sanctuary. Safina tried to speak up, hoping her stepmother would see how unfair she was being. But Chidinma only responded with harsh words. "This is my home now, and you will follow my rules," she would say. "You're nothing but an orphan now. Get used to it." The pain of being treated like a stranger in the house she had grown up in was more than Safina could bear. It was as if everything she had known had been taken away from her. Chidinma's true colors had come out, and Safina realized her stepmother had no intention of sharing the estate with her. Chidinma wanted it all for herself. Safina, heartbroken and confused, felt completely alone. She didn't know who to trust. Family friends, who once had welcomed her into their homes with open arms, now turned their backs on her, thinking Chidinma was the rightful head of the estate. Safina's life had been turned upside down in an instant, and it seemed like no one was on her side. But despite the cruel treatment, Safina couldn't give up. She held on to the memory of her father's love and the promise he had made to her. She knew she had to find a way to survive, but deep inside, she couldn't shake the feeling that something darker was at play, something that would soon be uncovered, and it would change everything. As the days passed after Olumide's death, Safina's life became more and more painful. While Chidinma busied herself with extravagant parties, buying new clothes, and showing off her newfound wealth, Safina was left in the shadows. It seemed like every time she tried to speak to someone, they ignored her, as though she didn't matter anymore. Chidinma had made sure to surround herself with guests, inviting friends and business partners over, throwing lavish events that showcased her new life of luxury. The house, once filled with warmth and laughter, now echoed with the sounds of music and laughter from strangers, all of them praising Chidinma for being the new head of the estate. Safina watched from the sidelines, feeling like a ghost in her own home. Even more hurtful was the way Chidinma treated her. She barely acknowledged Safina's presence at these gatherings. Safina was nothing more than a servant in the house, running errands and cleaning up after the parties, while Chidinma lived in the spotlight, enjoying everything Olumide had worked so hard to build. The isolation Safina felt was unbearable. Her own family friends, who had once been so close, started to pull away from her. They were now convinced that Chidinma was the rightful heir to the estate. They began to show more respect to her, offering their congratulations on her new role and avoiding Safina altogether. It felt as if she had been erased from the life she had once known. Safina tried to reach out to them, but no one wanted to listen. Every time she attempted to speak out or seek help, she was met with coldness and indifference. Chidinma's influence had taken hold, and no one seemed willing to challenge her. Safina could no longer recognize the people who had once been so supportive. Her heart ached with loneliness. Her once vibrant world, filled with the love of her father and the warmth of close relationships, had turned into a cold and silent place. Safina felt like an outsider in her own life. She had lost not just her father, but also the connections she had relied on. But even in the darkest of times, Safina refused to give up completely. She held on to the memories of the strong, loving bond she had shared with her father, and clung to the hope that one day she would find a way to take back what was rightfully hers. The pain of her loss and the sting of betrayal from those around her were unbearable. But deep down, she knew she couldn't allow herself to be erased so easily. Something deep inside her was still fighting, waiting for the right moment to rise above the isolation and loss she felt. One day, a letter arrived at the estate. It was an official-looking envelope, sealed with a wax stamp and addressed to Safina. As she opened it, her heart skipped a beat. Inside was a notice that the will of her late father, Olumide, was going to be read soon. The letter was from a mysterious lawyer named Barrister Tao, who had been chosen by her father to handle the reading of the will. Safina felt a mix of emotions: curiosity, hope, but mostly fear. She didn't know what to expect from this reading, but deep down, she feared the worst. Chidinma, however, was sure that the will would favor her. She had already begun to make plans for her new life, as if there was no question that she would inherit everything Olumide had left behind. The house, the business, the money. Chidinma believed it was all hers, and she acted as if she had already won. Safina couldn't help but feel hopeless. She had no idea what her father had left for her, or if he had left anything at all. After all, Chidinma had already taken control of the estate and pushed Safina to the side. The thought that her father's will might be in Chidinma's favor made Safina feel small and powerless. She doubted that her father had ever written anything that would protect her from Chidinma's cruel grip on the estate. On the day of the will reading, Safina entered the room with a heavy heart. Chidinma, sitting across from her with a smug look on her face, seemed perfectly confident, even relaxed. She gave Safina a quick, cold glance as if to say, "I told you so." To Chidinma, this was just a formality. She believed that soon the estate would be officially hers, and Safina would have no choice but to leave. Barrister Tao, the lawyer who had called the meeting, entered the room with a calm and serious demeanor. He carefully placed the will in front of him, and the room fell silent. The air was thick with tension as Chidinma sat back, waiting for what she believed was her moment of triumph. Safina, on the other hand, sat still, her heart racing. She tried to push away the doubt and fear clouding her mind, but it wasn't easy. She didn't want to get her hopes up, but part of her couldn't help but wonder, had her father truly left something for her? Could there be something in the will that would change everything? As the lawyer began to speak, Safina couldn't help but feel like this moment would decide everything about her future. Chidinma's confident smirk never left her face, but Safina could see that deep down, there was a hint of nervousness in her stepmother's eyes. It was as if Chidinma knew something might surprise her. Little did she know, the reading of the will would hold a secret that no one could have predicted. As the day of the will reading drew closer, Chidinma wasted no time spreading rumors about her complete control of the estate. She spoke to anyone who would listen, including the servants and even some of the family friends. "It's all mine now. she would say with a smile, as if she had already won. Olumide's will is clear. Everything belongs to me, and Safina is nothing but an outsider now. Safina overheard these conversations and felt a wave of panic wash over her. Chidinma's confidence seemed unshakable, and Safina couldn't help but wonder if her stepmother was right. Perhaps Olumide had truly left everything to Chidinma, and Safina would be left with nothing. The thought made her stomach churn. But even though she was anxious and unsure of what the will would reveal, Safina made up her mind to attend the reading. She couldn't stay away, even if it felt like it might be the hardest thing she had ever done. She had to know what her father had left for her, no matter how painful it might be. Safina tried not to get her hopes up. She told herself that it was better to expect nothing than to risk disappointment. Chidinma's words and actions had made it clear that she believed she was already in charge, and Safina felt powerless to stop her. Still, a small part of her wondered if her father had left some kind of surprise, something that would prove he hadn't forgotten about her. As the day of the reading approached, the air in the house became thick with tension. Chidinma walked around with an air of victory, as though the estate had already been transferred to her name. She made grand gestures, speaking about all the plans she had for the future, and how she would be taking care of everything now. Safina could hardly bear to watch. But despite her feelings of hopelessness, Safina knew she had to face the truth. She had to hear the will. Even if it was the last thing she wanted to do, she steeled herself for what was coming, knowing that her life could change forever in just a few moments. Whatever happened, she promised herself she would keep her dignity and not let Chidinma's cruelty break her. The will reading was drawing near, and Safina could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. What would it reveal? Would Chidinma's rumors be true? Or was there something more to her father's will than anyone had expected? The suspense was almost unbearable, and Safina's heart raced as the day she had dreaded and hoped for arrived. The room was silent as Barrister Tao stood before the gathered family members and staff, ready to begin the will reading. He carefully adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat, signaling that the moment everyone had been waiting for had finally arrived. Chidinma sat at the front, her posture straight, a smug smile on her face, as if she had already claimed victory. She was sure that the will would confirm her as the rightful owner of everything Olumide had worked so hard to build. Safina sat at the back, her hands trembling, feeling a knot in her stomach. She tried to calm herself, but the fear of losing everything made it hard to focus. She could hardly believe she was in this room, waiting to hear what her father had left behind. Would he have remembered her? Or would Chidinma's ruthless plans succeed? Barrister Tao began by speaking about Olumide's life, how he had built his empire from the ground up with hard work, dedication, and a strong sense of family values. He described Olumide as a man who valued integrity, loyalty, and compassion above all else. Safina's heart swelled with pride as she listened, knowing her father had always been guided by these principles. He had often told her that the most important thing in life was to stay true to yourself and to those you love. As the lawyer spoke, Chidinma's smile grew wider. She was clearly enjoying the moment, already convinced that Olumide's will would validate her as the new head of the estate. Of course, everything would go to me, she seemed to think, sitting back and crossing her arms with an air of superiority. Her eyes flicked briefly to Safina, who was sitting quietly in the corner, and she couldn't help but throw a quick, smug glance at her stepdaughter. Safina couldn't shake the feeling that Chidinma was gloating. Her stepmother's confidence was unsettling, and Safina found it hard to focus on what Barrister Tao was saying. The lawyer's voice continued, but it seemed to blur in her mind. She tried to breathe deeply, trying to remain calm, but the tension in the room was suffocating. Chidinma's confidence was so obvious that Safina started to doubt herself even more. She had always trusted her father's love and believed that one day she would inherit his business. But now it felt as if all of that was slipping away. She wondered if she was just clinging to a hope that was never meant to be. Finally, after a long pause, Barrister Tao adjusted his papers and looked up, ready to begin reading the actual will. The air in the room grew even heavier as the moment everyone had been waiting for arrived. Would Chidinma's smug smile be replaced by shock, or would her triumph be confirmed? Safina's heart pounded as she waited, unable to predict what would happen next. The words from the lawyer could change everything, and she had no idea if they would be a blessing or a curse. As Barrister Tao began to read the will, the room was thick with tension. Chidinma's smile was still plastered on her face, but Safina couldn't help feeling a knot tighten in her stomach. The lawyer paused for a moment, flipping through the papers. He cleared his throat, and the air seemed to freeze. "Before I continue," Barrister Tao said, his voice calm yet serious, "there is something important to reveal. Olumide made a decision before his death, a decision that was not included in the public version of his will." Safina's heart skipped a beat. Her mind raced. What was he talking about? A decision that hadn't been mentioned before. Chidinma's confident smile faltered slightly as she leaned forward, clearly intrigued. She had assumed the will was clear, that there was no reason for any surprises. Barrister Tao slowly pulled out a second, smaller envelope, its seal unbroken. "This is a secret will, which Olumide created some time before his passing," the lawyer continued, holding it up for everyone to see. "In this document, Olumide named his daughter, Safina, as the sole inheritor of his entire estate, his business, his home, and all of his assets." Safina's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. She looked at Barrister Tao in disbelief, her eyes wide with shock. It was as if the world had stopped for a moment. Chidinma's face turned pale. The smugness that had once radiated from her was now replaced with shock and anger. But, that's impossible," Chidinma stammered, standing up abruptly. "Olumide promised me everything. He told me I would take over." Barrister Tao remained calm. "I understand your surprise, Chidinma, but Olumide made this decision long before his passing. His love for his daughter, Safina, was clear, and he wanted her to continue the legacy he built." Safina could hardly process what was happening. She had expected disappointment, but this was something she hadn't even dreamed of. She had always felt like an outsider in her own home, but now her father's true wishes had been revealed. The house, the business, everything, it was all hers. As the weight of the moment sank in, Safina couldn't help but feel a rush of emotions. She felt overwhelmed with joy, relief, and even disbelief. This was what her father had wanted for her all along. Despite everything that had happened, he had made sure she would be the one to carry on his work. Chidinma, on the other hand, was livid. Her face turned red with fury, and she began pacing the room, her hands trembling. "This isn't fair," she shouted, her voice rising. "He can't do this to me." But Barrister Tao remained firm, his tone unwavering. Olumide's wishes were clear. This is the final will, and there is no question about it. Safina finally allowed herself a breath of relief. After all the pain, the isolation, and the uncertainty, this was the moment she had been waiting for. Her father had protected her, even after his death. She had been chosen to inherit everything, and now it was up to her to honor his legacy and take control of the future. As Barrister Tao continued reading from Olumide's will, a heavy silence filled the room. Chidinma was still trying to process the shock of the secret will. Her eyes were wide with disbelief, and her hands shook as she tried to regain control of herself. She was no longer the confident woman who had been so sure of her victory. But the lawyer wasn't finished. With a calm yet serious expression, Barrister Tao set down the will and reached into his briefcase. He pulled out a stack of papers, laying them on the table in front of everyone. The atmosphere in the room shifted, the tension growing thicker. "I'm afraid there is more to this situation," Barrister Tao said, his voice steady. "While Olumide's last will clearly named Safina as the rightful heir, it is also important to address some unlawful actions that have been discovered." Chidinma's face turned pale as the lawyer spoke. She looked around the room, her eyes darting nervously, as if trying to find a way out. But it was too late. Barrister Tao began presenting the evidence, documents that were clearly forged, fake signatures, and fraudulent papers that Chidinma had created to try to take control of Olumide's estate. "This is a forged document," Barrister Tao said, holding up one of the papers. "It's an attempt to make it look like Olumide signed it, but the handwriting does not match his. These documents were made to trick the estate's staff and Safina, and to make Chidinma the sole heir." Chidinma's breath caught in her throat. The room was now filled with murmurs of disbelief, as everyone began to realize the full extent of her deception. Her whole plan was being exposed in front of everyone. I didn't Chidinma stammered, trying to defend herself, but her voice trembled with fear. She couldn't speak clearly. Her entire world was crumbling around her. The lawyer didn't let her interrupt. He continued, showing more evidence of her illegal activities. This document here was used to manipulate the estate's financial records, Barrister Tao continued, pointing to another page. And here, we have a signed contract where Chidinma tried to forge Olumide's name to transfer large sums of money to her own accounts. Safina watched in disbelief as the truth unfolded before her eyes. Her heart pounded in her chest, not with joy, but with shock. She had never imagined that Chidinma, the woman who had once pretended to care for her, was capable of such betrayal. Chidinma's composure shattered. She stood up, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "This isn't true! You can't prove any of this!" she shouted, her voice cracking, but no one was listening. The room was filled with whispers. The staff, who had been silent witnesses to Chidinma's behavior, now looked at her with new eyes. They saw her for who she truly was, a fraud, a liar who had been taking advantage of Olumide's kindness and Safina's trust. Chidinma's shoulders sagged as she realized that there was no escape. The truth had been laid bare, and everyone now knew what she had done. She had tried to steal everything from Safina, and now she was being exposed for the criminal she was. The humiliation was unbearable. Chidinma's face twisted with fury and frustration, but deep down, she knew she had been caught. There was no denying it now. She had lost everything. Safina couldn't help but feel a sense of justice after all the pain and suffering Chidinma had caused. This was her comeuppance. It wasn't just about the estate anymore. It was about exposing the truth. Chidinma's actions had been revealed for what they truly were. And now, there was no place for her in Olumide's legacy. The room was still buzzing with shock and disbelief when suddenly the front door opened. A group of officers walked in, their uniforms sharp and their expressions serious. Safina's heart raced as she recognized the police. She had no idea they were coming, but now it seemed that the moment she had dreaded was finally here. Barrister Tao stood up, signaling to the officers. "These are the authorities who have been notified of the fraud and embezzlement committed by Chidinma. They are here to make an arrest." Chidinma's face drained of color. Her eyes widened in terror as the officers approached her. "No! This is all a mistake! I didn't do anything!" she shouted, backing away from them. She tried to escape, but the officers calmly moved toward her, not giving her any chance to flee. Safina watched, unable to believe what she was seeing. Just moments ago, Chidinma had been sitting confidently, convinced that the estate was hers. Now, she was being led away in handcuffs, her cries of protest echoing in the room. "How could this happen?" Chidinma muttered, her voice filled with disbelief and anger. "I was supposed to have everything. Olumide promised me." The officers didn't respond to her frantic words. They carefully guided her to the door, where Chidinma's world was crumbling down piece by piece. The scandal had unfolded in front of everyone, and now there was no way for her to deny the truth. As she was escorted out of the room, Chidinma turned to Safina, her eyes full of venom. "This isn't over," she spat, her voice filled with hatred. "You'll regret this, Safina. You've ruined me." Safina stood still, staring at her stepmother, but this time there was no fear in her heart. She had been through so much, and now justice was being served. "You did this to yourself, Chidinma," she said softly. "You betrayed my father's trust, and now you have to face the consequences." The officers led Chidinma away, and Safina watched in silence, her emotions a mix of sadness and relief. It was over. Her father's legacy was safe, and the woman who had tried to take everything from her had been exposed for the fraud she was. As the door closed behind Chidinma, Barrister Tao turned to Safina. "Your father would be proud of you, Safina. You stood strong, and now justice has been served." Safina nodded, feeling a sense of weight lift off her shoulders. The pain of losing her father was still fresh, but now she knew that his wishes had been honored, and the truth had come to light. The estate was hers, and with it, the responsibility to carry on Olumide's work. As the officers drove away with Chidinma, Safina stood there, taking in the moment. It had been a long, difficult journey, but at last, justice had been done. She had triumphed over the darkness that had threatened to take everything from her, and now She was ready to honor her father's legacy and begin a new chapter in her life. After everything that had happened, Safina finally felt a sense of peace. She stood in the grand hall of her father's estate, looking around at the familiar surroundings. The mansion that had once felt cold and full of tension now seemed like a place of hope and new beginnings. The dark cloud that had hovered over her for so long was finally gone. Her father's legacy, the business he had worked so hard to build, was now hers to protect and lead. Safina had worked hard all her life to understand the world her father had built, his company, his relationships, and his dreams. Now it was her turn to step into his shoes and lead. She spent days going through the books, meeting with the business partners, and making important decisions. The weight of responsibility was heavy, but she was determined to make her father proud. She wasn't just focused on the business, though. Olamide had always believed in giving back to the community, and that was something Safina was deeply passionate about too. She began to support the local schools, fund healthcare programs, and help struggling families. It was her way of honoring her father's legacy, making sure that his success didn't just benefit her, but the people around her. Safina also worked hard to rebuild the trust that had been broken. Chidinma's actions had caused pain and division, but Safina knew that she could heal those wounds. She invited old friends and business partners who had been turned away by Chidinma's lies. Slowly, she restored the connections that had been damaged. People who once doubted her now saw her as the strong, capable leader her father had always known she was. One evening, as Safina sat in her father's old office, she couldn't help but smile. She was exactly where she was meant to be. She had fought for everything that was rightfully hers, and in doing so, she had not only regained control of the estate, but had also found her true calling. She had grown into a person who was ready to take on the world with integrity and compassion. The estate, once a place filled with tension and greed, now thrived with purpose. Safina's leadership brought hope and prosperity, just as her father had envisioned. It wasn't just about wealth, it was about making a difference. Safina took a moment to look at a photograph of her father on the desk, his kind eyes staring back at her. She could almost feel his presence guiding her. "I'm doing it, Father," she whispered softly. "I'm making you proud." The journey had been long and filled with challenges, but Safina had emerged stronger than ever. She had won back her father's legacy, and more importantly, had redeemed herself in the process. Through her kindness, intelligence, and unwavering strength, she had shown that justice, love, and integrity always triumph in the end. And with that, she knew she was ready to continue her father's work, building a brighter future for all. Safina stood in the garden of her father's estate, looking out over the beautiful grounds. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden light over everything. She had been through so much, from the loss of her beloved father to the betrayal by Chidinma. But now, standing in this peaceful moment, Safina knew that all the pain had led her to this point, where she had finally found strength and purpose. She thought back to the days when she had felt lost and alone, unsure of what the future would hold. She remembered the sadness and fear she had felt when Chidinma had taken control, pushing her aside. It had seemed like everything was slipping away. But through all the hardship, Safina had never given up. She had fought for what was rightfully hers, not just for the estate, but for the memory of her father and the values he had taught her. It wasn't just about money or power. It was about justice. Safina had always believed in doing the right thing, even when it was hard. And in the end, justice had prevailed. Chidinma, who had tried to manipulate and deceive, had been exposed for her crimes. The truth had come to light, and Safina had regained control of the life her father had worked so hard to build. But even more than that, Safina had discovered her own strength. She had proven to herself that she could face challenges head-on and come out stronger. She had learned to trust her instincts, stand up for herself, and never back down. As she looked around at the thriving estate, the business that was flourishing under her leadership, and the people whose lives she had touched, Safina knew she had done more than just protect her father's legacy. She had built something that would last, a future filled with hope and opportunity for everyone. Her journey had not been easy, but it had been worth it. Safina had faced darkness and doubt, but through it all, she had found the light. She had turned pain into power, weakness into strength, and fear into courage. As the last rays of sunlight dipped below the horizon, Safina smiled, feeling a deep sense of peace. The road ahead was bright, and she knew that no matter what challenges came next, she would be ready. She had already proven that with justice, resilience, and hope, anything was possible. And so, the story of Safina's triumph ended, not with the closing of a chapter, but with the opening of a new one full of promise, integrity, and the unwavering belief that good things come to those who fight for what is right.